Welcome, everyone. How's your morning? Good? We're feeling good? Nice, nice. I need a little bit more energy, though. How's this morning? Good. Hey. Nice. Awesome. I'm glad you enjoyed your time in the morning. And I'm also glad we're getting together with all of the different programs and cohorts because you are part of a larger faculty. And so we'll be spending the rest of the day building our sense of community with one another. And also with our students in ECTEP. Hi, ECTEP. That's the camera over there. So we are recording today, just so folks that aren't able to attend can access the recording and still feel part of the welcome to the faculty. And that'll be available to our satellite campus in ECTEP as well. Big energy today. So I'm going to start by acknowledging with respect the Lekwungen, Songhees, and Esquimalt peoples on whose traditional territory the university stands, and the Wasanic and Lekwungen peoples on whose relationship with this land continues to this day. My name is Jasdeep, and I am the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, Decolonization Plus Coordinator. My work involves an education that helps prepare us for our collective futures, to help educators and practitioners like yourselves create capacities for themselves and their students for challenges like the climate crisis and other various forms of oppression. I use she, her pronouns, and as a queer woman of color, I'm a settler on these lands. You'll likely hear many territorial or land acknowledgements today, some that feel like quotes being read and others not. Land acknowledgements have gone through evolutions, and I've come to learn just how important it is to not only be respectful, but to also reflect on all that's happened and taken place for us to be able to gather together like this. Particularly for us to be in the Faculty of Education, it's important to remember and understand how education was used as a tool of erasure, genocide, and ethnic cleansing. The former Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, TRC chair, the Honorable Murray Sinclair said, "Education is what got us into this mess, and education is a key to getting us out of it." So I share this quote with you as an invitation to carry that quote with you as you begin deciding who you're going to be as practitioners, to carry with you as you begin your programs and thinking about your role in using education as a healing tool. There's been a lot of movement around and excitement from today, so even for my own benefit, I just need a moment, and hopefully you can join me in taking a moment to ground ourselves in this room and on this land so we can all be present for Vanessa's keynote. So I hope you'll join me in taking a moment now. So to close your eyes and breathe in through your nose and out through your mouths. And as you continue slowly breathing in and out, feel the weight of our bodies in our seats, our feet on the ground. Take a moment to appreciate today being the first of a long journey you'll be undertaking. It's exciting and it can be stressful all at the same time. If you remember to take moments like this in, remember the land you are creating memories on, the ocean waves that can calm you, and the greenery that resembles our growth and our curiosity. Some of that stress might melt away. Just be present in this moment and continue breathing. Thank you. I'm going to gently bring you back and open your eyes. Focus back on the front here. I'm now going to introduce you to our keynote speaker today. July marked a year since Dr. Dean Vanessa Andreotti joined us. And in that time, her leadership has involved helping guide our faculty through some major changes, university-wide changes. So if there's anyone that understands complexity, it would be her. So her research in complexity is recognized around the world. And I'm sure with whatever she shares with you today, it will help guide you within and beyond your studies with us. So welcome, Vanessa.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. My name is Vanessa Andreotti. I go by pronouns she and her, and I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Education. I'm very glad to be here. At UVic, as Jasdeep said, I started a year ago. And I came to Canada, married into a Korean Blackfoot family, but I identify here in Canada as a racialized settler, and that's important so that there's respect for those in the front line of the struggle of Indigenous people here. But I come from a family of German and Indigenous ancestry as well, from Brazil. From my mom's side, she's Guarani. And in the Guarani community, I've learned a different kind of land acknowledgement that takes a whole day. And we're not going to do this today. I'm just going to try to bring the 4 parts of the land acknowledgement as something that can ground us today. So this land acknowledgement starts with the land itself. We greet the land not as property or resource, but as a living entity that contains us. And this land is currently in distress because of actions that we have done to violence inflicted on the land, violence inflicted on each other, but also violence inflicted on our own selves, because our bodies are also land. So we take a minute to greet the land and acknowledge it as a living being. The second acknowledgement is the acknowledgement of ancestors, but ancestors are not just those who have come before us, but also those yet to come. So if you look at our students, they are also ancestors. And we have different responsibilities to those who have come before and those who are yet to come. So those who have come before, we need to honor their sacrifices and their livelihoods by also correcting their mistakes. So that's also on us, so that those who come afterwards can hear us saying, the buck stops here in my generation. So it's a cultural responsibility. The third acknowledgement is the acknowledgement that asks us to think about everything that makes it possible for us to be here today in an institution like the university, including the traditional and ancestral custodians of this land, the Songhees and the Esquimalt Indigenous peoples, but also the historical and systemic violence that is necessary for institutions like this to continue to exist. So this is not a call for us to be in shame or feel guilty, but for us to acknowledge the complicity and harm as leverage for responsibility. And you will have a lot of responsibility also bringing this into schools, into the classrooms. And the last acknowledgement is the acknowledgement that we're all a family of both human and non-human beings. That is also complicated, right? Coming from the 4 directions. And like every family, people don't get on very well, right? I'm sure that you have experienced it in your families, but our family right now is in a time of extreme polarization. And it is the role and the job of education to try to bring people together. And that's hard at the times that we're living in right now. So this process of healing these fractures is also part of your job as teachers or as health practitioners in the sector. And this is some of what we're going to be talking about today. So the title of the presentation is Education, Health, and Wellbeing in Times of VUCA. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And when I asked, oops, where is it? Come on, go on, it's not working. Jasmine, can you do the, okay. So when I asked DALL-E to create an image representing volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and I put just digital art, this is what came up. I think you'll need to, okay, sorry. So very kind of gloomy and kind of horrible. Then I put another prompt, which was try the colorful version of it. And then it looked better, right? But the contrast of gloomy and colorful represents how we have not been equipped by education to deal with the current times of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I would like to invite you to look at volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity through the colorful lens, not the dark lens. So what we're going to be doing today is just thinking through what creates this context of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And what we don't take time anymore to do is to be thinking about where we're coming from, right? What has happened in the last 30 years. So 30 years ago, 31 years ago, I was starting my teacher education program. I was exactly where you are in the seat. And that was 1993. And that's the same year that the internet became commercially available for the people. Before it was just the military and universities. 1993 was when everybody started to have access to the internet. And I remember that year, a group of professors at my university in Brazil decided to get together and create a manifesto that talked about the dangers of the internet. And they wanted to ban the internet. They really wanted to shut it down. And that was a bit unrealistic, right? And I kind of knew, but I agreed with some of the criticisms that they had put in that manifesto. Then in 1998, Google was founded. So up to 1998, the internet was really a mess. You would need to know where to go, or you would rely on older search engines like Alta Vista. Who in this room knows or has used Yahoo or Alta Vista? Okay, there's a lot of people. That's pretty good. So I'm not that old, basically. So the moment that Google was founded is the moment also that education changes and the role of the teacher changes forever. Because up to 1998, teachers could, like, relatively curate the curriculum for students, right? So when I was growing up in my primary and secondary schools, the teachers had much more power to define what I was exposed to. But by 1998, that changes because Google starts to index everything that is on the internet and make everything available. So from 1998, the idea that teachers will select the experience of the students is out of the window. The students will have access to everything already. So the role of the teacher then is not to curate the experience, but help people process what they are already exposed to. And it takes it's taking a long time for us to think through what that means, right? Then in 2000, we have mass adoption of cell phones. 2003, Skype is launched. My kids, because we were living in Aotearoa, New Zealand, had their relationship with grandparents really enabled by Skype. And it was funny because in the beginning, they would talk to their grandparents through Skype, and then they started growing and they were not interested in the grandparents anymore. So we decided to turn the computer so that the grandparents could watch cartoons with them, right? As they were relating. And then they started fighting over the cartoons they wanted to watch. It was interesting to see that kind of different form of relationship happening in my house. 2004, Facebook is launched, and with that, social media starts to become one of the main ways that people relate to each other. So people start to relate to each other through the devices, and sociality becomes mediated by these devices as well. 2007, there's introduction of iPhones and the onset of mass adoption of phones. Before that, remember that we had to still carry with us the digital cameras. Who in this room still has digital cameras? Okay, there you go. 2010, Instagram, and then we skip to 2020, Zoom's rapid growth. 2010-21 is the year where it's known that the hybrid learning revolution happens, of course, because of the pandemic. And then 2022, ChatGPT and other LLM, large language models, artificial intelligence are made publicly available. And we still don't know what this means for education. We're still living that revolution. So all of this changes also mean changes in access to information, knowledge production, social relations, the identity building, sense of belonging, use of time, attention span, jobs, and health and well-being. And I'm going to emphasize this again. We're still thinking through and living through what this means. We don't have all the answers because it's happening now. So in higher education, there's also a shift that happens because of technology. So before the internet, the university had the monopoly over value creation and selection. So the university had much more power in defining what knowledge was considered of most worth. But with the internet, things become much more difficult because you have everybody producing knowledge, right? Content creation becomes more democratically available. So there's also an exponential increase in publishing, and the traditional hierarchies of authority, prestige, influence within the university, as well as disciplinary boundaries, are challenged. So in the 90s, we would have disciplinary boundaries very well defined and some work across the boundaries, but now it's much more difficult to see if you're looking at something, whether it is one discipline or another, that it's much more blurred. And if we look at what happened in the last 15 years, not just in terms of technology, but also in terms of social movements and change, we will also see that there's also seismic forces, right? So it's like an earthquake happening as well, starting with the financial global crisis in 2008. 2013, what I chose there was that the I Don't Know More and Black Lives Matter movements already sparked, and they were starting to become more visible. Of course, it becomes much more visible later, but it had already started there. 2015, the Roads Must Fall movement in South Africa starts to popularize the idea of decolonization. That's when we start talking about decolonization across universities internationally. And there's also the launch of the TRC report here in Canada. 17, Me Too movement, and that's also the year where the world's richest 1% are documented to own 50.1% of the world's wealth. Then we have the school strikes for climate movement in 2019. 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and there is also public awareness then about unmarked graves in residential school sites. It's important to say that the communities knew that these graves were there for a long time, and were asking the government for support to reveal them. 2022, invasion of Ukraine. 2023, the attack of Hamas and the next chapter of the Palestinian struggle. In 2024, the hottest day ever recorded. Actually, the hottest day was ever recorded from 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, and it's gonna go. So this change, in summary, in synthesis, they evoke calls for decolonization, for reconciliation, for racial justice, equity, end of gun violence, awareness of sexual violence, gender and sexual rights, climate action, and climate justice. And in the university, we have reduced government funding or only targeted government funding. We have economic rationalization of everything. We have a shift in student identity and also student entitlements, and we have a global mental health crisis. So sitting with all of this, we have to be thinking about how does it feel, right? As we hold space for all this complexity, and we lack elders and also intergenerational sharing to be able to process this cognitively, affectively, and relationally. So what's different? And here's just one possible summary of what it's different today from what it was in the 90s, for example. So today in education and in social environments, we have a chaotic cacophony of perspectives that makes it very difficult for us to have enduring consensus or stable authorities. As teachers, your authority is gonna be challenged all the time. And that is normal, right? We will have to learn to dance with that. There's reactive polarization, and that is very dangerous because for many different reasons, that polarization doesn't lead to anything that can actually help us work as a species, like in the planet. We're kind of being fragmented and polarized in ways that can lead to our own destruction, basically. Number three, there's discursive transaction, policing, and confusion. So people have learned that we can invent words and that words are not just what is in the dictionary. We can work with language in a much more fluid way. However, that creates a lot of problems in terms of communication as well. And that's why you have some policing and some confusion as we play with that. Number four, there are multiple moving layers of complexity. So our education so far, what it has taught us to do was to look at layers of complexity of the world and collapse them in one layer. And then we impose a narrative of coherence. We police the borders, we edit out what doesn't fit, and we police the borders. Now, when we have an environment of hyper complexity, this becomes a pressure cooker. Because then if it doesn't fit your narrative of coherence, you're going to employ a lot of energy and a lot of time in trying to keep that narrative. And what happens is that creates a lot of anxiety. So we need the kind of education that can help us release the valve of the pressure cooker safely so that we don't have lentils everywhere out of that pressure cooker. Then we have unprocessed hyperconsumption. So our mode of relating to the world today is of consumption, not just of stuff, but also of relationships, consumption of knowledge, consumption of critique, consumption of outrage. And this is creating a huge constipation. And maybe we need the kind of education that is probiotic and that will create the necessary diarrhea. Then we have general lack of capacity to process contradictory emotions. So we are taught, again, that we have one emotion at a time. We are either sad or happy, either stressed or excited about something. But in reality, we have a lot happening inside of us. Who here has seen Inside Out? 1 and 2. So you know that thank God there is some mass media communication helping us understand the complexity that happens within us. And today we're going to talk about a tool that also helps with that in a minute. Now, wait, we're still there. Excessive distractions, I don't have to say anything about that. You have it in your hands. Echo chambers, post-truth as well. So people are creating realities and they are it doesn't matter if that reality has any tethered with what's actually happening. So you see politicians creating whatever they want And that becomes the reality, right? And instead of figuring out if it has any material basis in what's actually happened. That is called the post-truth era. Then number 9, there are wider intergenerational gaps and a change of the intergenerational social contract. So here, so before this time, we were taught that because there is incremental prosperity in the world, younger generations, older generations, all the improvements that they have given us. So when we look at climate destabilization and biodiversity collapse, younger generations are now looking at the older generations and saying, actually, it's not incremental prosperity anymore. And we're challenging this contract. So if we've been shortchanged, maybe we will not pay your pension anymore, right? So that's kind of thinking is starting to happen with younger generations really challenging older generations about their use of resources and the kind of world that they are leaving to younger generations. I think you're going to be, if you're a teacher, you might be dealing with that also in your classrooms. And number 10, there's stacked existential threats, war and terrorism, climate destabilization, ecological collapse, and the dangers of unhinged AI, unhinged artificial intelligence. So how does that feel? And I think this picture really portrays what a lot of people feel when they look at the stacked layers of complexity: systemic complexity, historical complexity, intergenerational complexity, personal complexity, and the fact that our modern education system does not prepare us to deal with complexity. It prepares us for stability and predictability, for certainty and control. And we will need to change that if we are to survive this. So when we're feeling that weight on our back, we kind of hold on to a stick of unstable certainties so that these unstable certainties can fend off the fear, the frustration, the resentment, the sense of hopelessness, disillusionment, the sense of immobilization, isolation, scarcity, and despair. And when we look at this picture, if we leave that weight on our back, it can break our back. It can break our back individually, but it can also break our back as society. So the kind of education we need is one where we take safely. If you are weightlifters, you know I'm not. I should be. But if you take that weight out and you put it in front of you and you safely place it on the floor, you will know if you lift weight that you need to develop the muscles and the capacity, the posture to do this. Because if you do it too quickly or without the strength, you get hurt, right? So how do we create a kind of education that can help society do this movement? Put this complexity in front of us, put it on the floor so that collectively we can be present to it. And there's a lot in there that needs to be composted. Right? So in my research team, we call it the shit, right? So there's a lot of shit composting that needs to happen, of historical things, of systemic things that are going on that we don't know how to deal with. And that because it involves collective pain, it overwhelms individual hearts. So we need to collectivize the heart to be able to do the shit composting. We need actually a shit composting party to be able to do this. Because without joy, you can't do it. You can't do it only with self-righteousness, right? We will need humility to be able to do it together and to be able to do it well and to be able to do it in a way that doesn't foster polarization. And we don't know how to do it yet. And it is the role of education to support this. So, how do we learn to face VUCA, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity? We need to start by learning to hold space for our own internal complexity. So I'm going to show you one tool that can help with that. And that's the tool called the bus within us. So in this tool, I will invite you to imagine that you are a bus of people. Doesn't have to be only of people. You can have dogs and cats there or other creatures. But the idea is that there is a driver at the front driving. There are passengers in front of the bus that you know very well, passengers in the middle of the bus that only speak rarely, and passengers at the back of your bus who you don't even know, who you might be trying to repress or you don't want to hear, but they could be sabotaging your engine, right? Now, it doesn't have to be a bus, but your image, your metaphor will have to have three things. One is movement. The other one is plurality and a level of dissonance, right? It has to be something conflictual. So it could be, for example, an orchestra, a jazz orchestra. It could be an ecology, a forest, as long as there is movement and you can kind of fast forward things a little bit. Or you can be spaceship full of chipmunks. It doesn't matter. As long as you can see that there's something going on inside, there's a dynamic going on inside. So with the bus, we ask people when they're facing an issue or being present to a problem to observe their bus, right? See who's talking there, what they're saying, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and to give a vocabulary for these passengers to tell you what's going on in there. And the idea here is that if you cannot hold space for the complexity within you, there's zero chance you're going to be able to hold space for the complexity around you. So if you think you are just coherent with one opinion and one feeling and moving forward, it's going to be very challenging. The other thing that you can do with the bus, if you're a teacher, for example, and if you have this practice with your students, is to say to people, check your bus, what's going on, right? And then people can say, there's a passenger on my bus saying this. And this means that it's not the whole of me who's saying this, it's just part of me that is concerned about this. Or you can say, there is a conversation between two people who don't agree on my bus. This person is saying this, the other person is saying that, and I'm just observing. We actually ask people to observe what they are learning from, to report on what they are observing from, or no, except back. To report on what they're learning from observing the dynamics of their bus. And the more you do that, the more self-reflexive you become, and the easier it is to engage with complexity. If you don't have a methodology for figuring out the dynamics within yourself, as I said before, it's not going to be easy to deal with the dynamics around you, the complex dynamics around you. Another way we use the bus is to ask people to talk about the movement of their learning. So I can say, for example, check in, how's your bus going? And you can say, oh, my bus is lacking fuel, going on a straight line, caught in a roundabout, fallen into a ditch, but coming back up, and going up a hill, down a hill. You can use the metaphor in ways that talk about learning as movement, not as arrival. And it's very useful when you do that, because also you are activating other kinds of neural pathways to engage with your learning, not just the logical ones. Okay, so what kind of education then is needed? And it's interesting because, like, when I was in your seat, what I expected education to be, I expected my teacher education program to give me everything to be ready to go into the classroom. And I was already wrong back then, right? Teacher education is not going to give you everything so that you're ready to go into the classroom. It's going to start a lifelong and life-wide process that you just receive the basics here of a dance. So what kind of education do we need? We need an education that prepares you to expect change and be prepared to dance with change, giving you flexibility to think on your feet and adaptability to respond gracefully to shifting grounds in your profession and in society. Was it why you decided to come to teacher education or health profession? Maybe, probably not. Number 2, expand capacity to hold space for difficult things without feeling overwhelmed or immobilized, developing stamina and resilience for the long haul. Number 3, to embrace your training and professional knowledge and identity as a lifelong and life-wide inquiry, approaching things with curiosity rather than the desire for certainty, seeing both success, mistakes, and failure as good data. We also need to invite a different neurochemistry into teaching and learning, and instead of dopamine-based achievement, to embrace uncertainty and find the heights of depth of epiphanies in learning and unlearning collectively and collaboratively. So it's very different when you achieve something that you already knew. That's one kind of neurophysical process, but it's another when there is an epiphany. So what I've learned from indigenous knowledge keepers is that the kind of indigenous knowledge that is taught in community is not one where you teach directly, but you create the conditions so that that person has their own epiphany. Because if they have the epiphany, they own it. If they don't have the epiphany, they receive that learning from you, and that depends on your authority and the legitimacy of your authority. And remember, we were talking about authority being challenged all the time. So for learning to be resilient and for learning to be owned, it needs to be through an epiphany. So here, that kind of learning, and this is my position, that's the SMDR is a compass that I use for my own learning too, and my own learning as inquiry. I talk about, in my research team, we talk about a compass of 4 things. Number 1 is emotional sobriety or emotional stability, the ability to be calm in the face of turbulence, right? So that means disinvesting from harmful desires and compulsions. And generally, it's the compulsion to fix and to have certainty and to have answers. It's the ability to live with the uncertainty that is required in relationships. The second one is relational maturity. So building relationships based on deeper levels of trust, respect, reciprocity, accountability, consent, compassion, and kindness, which we call the TRAC orientation. Then there's also intellectual discernment, which means not being overwhelmed or immobilized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the last one is intergenerational responsibility, what we have already talked about in terms of saying the buck stops here in my generation. And this responsibility is not just intergenerational, but also interspecies. We're also responsible for the whole ecosystem that makes it possible for us to be alive. So to conclude, I'm going to be inviting you in your program to take notice of this methodology called 7 steps back and 7 steps forward or aside. And here are the first steps back. So I'm inviting you today to start your program considering the invitation for 7 steps back. The first is stepping back from your self-image to decenter your ego, and my ego too, and center the challenge at hand, which is to support incoming generations through education or health practices. Number 2 is stepping back from one's generational cohort, from your own generational cohort, to have a sense of how incoming generations may interpret and experience the challenges in the world very differently from you. Number 3, stepping back from the universalization of your social, cultural, economic parameters of normality, to understand that your privilege is also a loss of perspective and sensibility. 4 is stepping back from the immediate context and time to see the wider historical structure and systemic patterns, the wider picture. Number 5 is stepping back from normalized patterns of problem solving, and relationship building to tap what is already viable but unimaginable or unintelligible within the mainstream. So what else is viable that we're missing out on? Number 6 is stepping back from the elevation of humanity above the rest of nature to consider our metabolic entanglement with the planet, the fact that we're part of it, not above it. And 7 is stepping back from the impulse to find quick fixes in order to expand our capacity not to be immobilized by complexity, complicity, and uncertainty. And here are the 7 steps forward or aside. Number 1 is stepping forward or aside with honesty and courage to see what you don't want to see. Number 2 is stepping forward or aside with humility to find strength in openness and vulnerability. Number 3 is stepping forward or aside with self-reflexivity so that you can read how you are being read and learn to read the room. Number 4 is stepping forward or aside with self-discipline to do the work on yourself so that you don't become work for other people. Number 5, stepping forward or aside with maturity to do what is needed rather than only what you want to do, and to become a good elder and ancestor for all relations. 6, stepping forward or aside with expanding discernment and attention, increasing care in proportion to risk. And the final one is stepping forward or aside with adaptability, flexibility, stamina, and resilience for the long haul. To be prepared to fall, to fail, to have your plans shattered, to be stretched, to change course, and to find joy in the struggle itself rather than in the imagined prize at the end. So that's it. Off you go.